So you know how I said I was going to make that video on the new Colossus? Well, that's happening right now, and I've got plenty to say, so strap the fuck in, we're in this together. Let me set the scene for you really quickly. Coming off the high of the universally acclaimed first two entries in the new Wolfenstein series, Machine Games knew they wanted to get bolder, take more risks, and make a much more enjoyable experience than the last two combined, with an extremely refined combat system and a shiny, sparkly new engine to boot. So, they started putting the wheels in motion to create a successor worthy of the name. They immediately switched to using id Tech 6, overhauling everything from character models, animations, weapons, enemies, and remaking all of them from the ground up so that they could look perfect in this brand spanking new engine. They landed on the goal of making a game as close to the new order in terms of feeling and gameplay and combat as possible. On top of a concrete next step for the story, they planned to go to America, specifically looking at how the Nazis could twist and deform American culture to better suit the Nazi Germany ideal. Things kept looking up for the new Colossus. They landed on America for the game's setting, as it was Blazkowicz's home, lending to an immense amount of possibilities for where the story could go, making it one of true sadness and making the game deeply personal for both the player and the protagonist, really putting them in Blazko's shoes. Not to mention the endless possibilities the game could have, considering the clashing ideals of a land founded on the basis of freedom under totalitarian control by the Nazis, and how a subversion of American culture by the Germans could lend to environmental storytelling, art direction, or entire characters. They brought back Mick Gordon and they signed on Martin Stig Anderson from Limbo and Inside fame to collaborate on the soundtrack together. Anderson handling the Nazi side of the soundtrack with his bone-chilling ambiance, setting the tone for the quieter areas of Wolfenstein's soundtrack, and creating a sense of foreboding isolation. Would then be flipped whenever plans go south, allowing for Mick to come in and crank up the synths, intensifying set pieces, adding excitement, and truly solidifying the idea that the player is not locked in an arena with them, they are locked in with the player, solidifying the power fantasy that these games excel in.
Thank you, William. The housemaster is losing track of us now. Find your way back to the locker room. Bombate will let you out of there.
This would go hand in hand perfectly with a guttural, heavy, and physical combat system, far improved from the days of 2014. They had ideas early on about how they could achieve this, with designers throwing around ideas that explosions should be able to knock Blazkowicz off his feet, throwables should be able to take limbs off, or takedowns should be more bloody, and convey Blazko's feeling of pure hatred for what the Nazis have done to his country. They increased Blazkowicz's movement speed across the board to enhance the dual-wield gameplay of the first game, with the goal of making it far more enjoyable and less like a hindrance, with the trade-off of lower movement speed being completely erased. Fully committed to the idea of creating a truly cathartic shooter, they also committed to gunfights being a proper test to the player, forcing them to get creative to thrive in this game as much as possible, leading to a hypothetically far more enjoyable experience, which would go hand in hand perfectly with the increased physicality and weight of the new combat system. Now, let me be clear. This is a massive undertaking for Machine Games, let alone any other company to do. Completely redoing every asset in the game, starting from scratch in a completely new engine, trying to follow up two of the best modern shooters in recent memory, with a huge emphasis on subverting American ideals and culture, while delivering a deeply personal, engaging, and foreboding narrative is a huge ask. As someone who is studying computer science, I feel deeply for every developer seeing the comments some capital G gamers make, and despite that, still finding a reason to come into work regardless of the horrible work conditions, the crunch, company politics, and overall bullshit, ultimately for a bunch of people who typically see them as disposable. And it makes what I'm about to say in this next chapter harder for me to do, because I do want the best for this industry. but to say that this game has problems is a massive understatement. Machine Games had amazing plans for this game, but for every grand sweeping statement that they made about what they wanted it to be, the monkey's paw curled. They said that they wanted the story to be bolder, they wanted to be fearless, and they wanted total unrestricted creative freedom, so that they wouldn't have to shy away from obnoxiously grandiose and crazy moments. What we got was a story that has unbelievably bad issues with tonal consistency, wild characters and moments that don't feel correct for the amount of Nazis that you tear through to get there, comically, laughably, cartoony antagonists that just don't feel intimidating in the slightest, and story beats that just feel like they're about to pull you in for some gripping character development, and then Super Spesh bursts out of the toilet cheering because he just finished shitting in a toilet with running water. What the fuck is this shit? He hasn't even fucking washed his hands! They said that they wanted a bigger, better, and more robust engine to make those polygons pop and make the game as beautiful as it is fun, on top of being able to do more grandiose set pieces that will have players' jaws on the floor. Well, they were on the floor, but for the completely wrong reason. On launch day, the game was panned for its piss-poor performance on PC, with people to this day getting error messages about running out of VRAM, causing crashing constantly. Which is complete and utter bullshit, considering the game could be ran on Ultra with no problem at all on cards ranging from the GTX 980, which has 4GB of VRAM, mind you, to the newest 24GB cards. It was speculated for a while that the game had a memory leak, but it's since been theorized that it was a bugged patch from the devs that caused this issue to still be prevalent to this day. Even on safe mode, running at lower than average settings, I can't seem to stop getting this error, even on my RTX 3070. They said that they wanted a more physical, heavy, and brutal combat system. And yeah, sure, we got that, but at the cost of there not being a sweet spot for difficulty. Enemies feel like they do far too much damage on higher difficulties, and are completely brainless on lower. Just about everything in this game has a caveat to it. Nothing except for the music feels spot on in the game. And even then it's not totally perfect because the game has horrible mixing. Which was actually an issue in the first two games that I completely forgot to mention. Whoops, sorry about that. Just about everything in this game feels slightly off or plain disrespectful. And these are just the spark notes as well. It just gets worse the more you dig. So, let's talk about it. What the game does wrong, the little the game does right, and what the fuck can be learnt from it and improved in a possible sequel. The gameplay of Wolfenstein 2 is undoubtedly a step up, bringing many welcome additions to the table while still keeping the core identity of the formula from the previous games intact. The main difference being the amount of shit flying at you, how fast said shit can kill you, and BJ's increased move speed. Plus the completely overhauled dual wielding system, making it so you can pair up just about any weapon you want and have a grand old time doing it, killing just as effectively as you would if you just had two of the same weapons. Which would all be neat and dandy and welcome additions if this were the New Order or the Old Blood, where enemies were just far more balanced. Unfortunately, they're not here. Even at its worst, the New Order still felt fair. The New Colossus, on the other hand, throws any semblance of balance out the window, with the justification of making it a more gory, physical, and heavy game at the cost of enemy balancing. Enemies deal far too much damage in this game. On higher difficulties, this can be an absolute nightmare to play, with enemies being able to melt you in under a second if you don't get the drop on them first. I just don't understand how Machine Games hasn't come to terms with the idea of having your cake and eating it too. It cannot be this hard to balance gameplay at higher difficulties. You don't even need to tweak the damage numbers. Here, let me break out the whiteboard real quick, I'll show you what I mean. Right now, the way that the game seems to be working to me is on lower difficulties the bullets do less damage and enemies have worse aim overall. This is individual for every enemy. The complete opposite occurs on higher difficulties though. Enemies seem to have individually better aim and deal much more damage than before. So individually, everything is hitting you like a freight train. I understand that computer scientists take optimizing being lazy very seriously, but this cannot be a hard fix to make for the team that they have at Machine Games. I'll even propose one to make it easier on the devs, because they're obviously too busy polishing the individual blood particles on Anya's tits during her pregnant rampage. Real plot point, by the way. And yeah, look, I know it's completely different teams, but it's my joke and it further emphasizes why the game is a colossal step down from what came previous, so eat shit, idiot. What the devs could have done was made a clause in the AI that bumped up accuracy when more of them were in the immediate area to the player, but simultaneously lowered the bullet damage overall to acceptable levels, so it didn't feel like an absolute nightmare every time you got caught out or flanked on, effectively lowering the enemy damage, lowering the amount of retries and keeping me from having a 13th reason why. Obviously the ratios would need to be tweaked, and this is certainly no easy task, but it is certainly better than the literal fuck all compensation the game has currently. It may not be an easy fix, but it's certainly one that's simple enough that can be fixed with just a little bit of time and a couple mentions in some meetings. I can wholeheartedly say that if this change was added to the game, I would have enjoyed it infinitely more than I would have on my first playthrough, even with all the issues that the game has that aren't related to gameplay. But honestly, knowing the way that AAA studios treat their developers, I can see why it would have been overlooked. Even though I have many problems with the way that the game handles combat, there are surprisingly things I enjoy about it. Shocking, I know, but I'll keep this brief, don't you worry. Regardless of the way that the game handles damage, I do really like the weightiness that the game has. Having explosions knock you down is a cool addition, and it's a buzzkill when it happens, sure, but it encourages the player to position better and actually think about what they're doing in a gunfight. The new arsenal of weapons is incredibly fun to use, and the upgrade system that the game has for these weapons turn them into absolute machines. The marksman scope and armor-piercing rounds for the Sturmgewehr, and the nail gun and drum mag upgrades for the machine pistol are just so fun to use. Being able to dual-wield any combination of weapons is so much fun. I personally didn't find too many uses for it, but I was thoroughly entertained anytime I did use it. And the increased movement speed, while being a bit much, is a great addition. It does make me wonder though if these changes are why enemies do so much damage, because you could reposition so much easier with these new changes to movement. Maybe they want people to be running around more, but it doesn't really make much sense seeing as you die just as fast. Levels are extremely cramped in a lot of areas, and you are forced to camp a lot on higher difficulties. Not to mention, every enemy has hit-scan weapons. You are going to be tracked no matter what. So yeah, that's basically it for my compliments on the gameplay. Everything else the game has is mostly a step down. Except for the hatchet. I will gladly take a fierce decapitating hatchet over a flaccid knife any time. I feel like this game uses too many commanders. The number has straight up been doubled from the New Order. Every new area typically has a set of commanders to deal with, and stealth hasn't been evolved at all to deal with this. Even with the visceral nature that the hatchet has, there's nothing that can save this game's stealth. It's basically the same as the previous games, except you have a way easier time getting detected. Stealth isn't always an option, which fucks me off considering it's one of the 3 upgrades that the player gets towards the midpoint of the game. It lets you squeeze through tight areas, encouraging a stealthy playstyle, but some areas just don't give the player an option at all. Why even bother giving the players the tools to play stealthy and enhance the stealth gameplay if they can't even run through the entire game, start to finish, using stealth? I really shouldn't even say it enhances stealth gameplay. In the latter half of the game, it's the only way to play stealthy. You need that upgrade if you want to play stealthy. And even then, some areas just won't allow it. Fuck, at least the New Order and the Old Blood gave you a reason for why stealth was sometimes not an option. The railcar or bridge crossing into Paderborn in Old Blood, or the final London Nautica fight and the Berlin base sacking in New Order. The game always gave you a reason for why, and it tried to empower the player to go loud and have fun. Because there was just no way in hell you could do the London Nautica boss fight stealthy. But why the fuck could I not do the Mars level while stealthed? I can't remember a single story beat or sequence that mission would have that would make it impossible. You just can't because of the amount of hot garbage that the game is stacked with. So they fucked up going loud, they somehow made stealth worse. What else could they ruin about this game? How about the entire skill system? So yes, rather than having a skill system that makes the player experiment with weapons and tries to teach them how to play smart or go for sick plays, the devs at Machine Games decided to go for a milestone skill system. rewarding numbered buffs for getting headshots or kills with explosions, etc. Which, can I just say, is probably the biggest step down, in my opinion, from the previous games in terms of gameplay. What these games strive in is getting the player to use a variety of weapons to get through fights as cleanly as possible. You are supposed to adapt on the fly. The old skill system forced players to experiment and use a variety of weapons to get the best outcome possible. It made players adapt. With this new system, there's no reason to adapt at all. You can get headshots with literally any weapon in the game, and headshots increase bullet damage overall. So once you have that, there's really no reason to go for anything else, because the game doesn't force you to improvise, and it won't reward you accordingly. So why should the player bother? The worst part about all of this is that they're far too grindy for the rewards you get. I honestly should have mentioned this sooner, but the reason gameplay feels so one-sided sometimes, with enemies dealing far too much damage, is because the game expects you to be grinding for these big skills that decrease enemy damage overall. Why the fuck should the player have to grind for these skills in a linear action FPS? It's 7 hours long. There is just simply not enough time to make this grind worth it in any sort of way to the player. And it just ends up ruining their experience as a whole if they're on higher difficulties. Because who the fuck wants to grind for a single player FPS that is at max 7 hours long just to play it properly? Fuck me. At least the sound design is still impeccable from the previous games. It was one of my personal highlights for those games, and I'm glad that they paid attention to it. And that goes doubly for this one too. My only struggle is the god-awful mixing. If I recall correctly, there wasn't a way to custom mix audio from the previous games. And this game is a step up. You can change the audio mixing yourself, but even with the music maxed out, the action still outweighs the amazing soundtrack, and it makes it excruciatingly hard to hear. I just want to rip and tear through the Nazis the way I want. I don't want to diagnose the audio mixing for a game I spent my hard-earned money on. Why couldn't they just get it right? I'd honestly argue that the best way to play this game would be to turn the music off completely and play the game as a run-and-gun shooter, ignoring stealth entirely, and having a pair of earbuds under your headphones blasting the soundtrack on a separate device. At least then you can be rest assured it's mixed correctly. I wish I could say that this is where the problems end for this game, but as you can see from the length of this video, we're not even close to done, and I would argue that this is really only the first layer. I would say wholeheartedly that a bulk of the problems that this game has come from the fact that the game has massive tonal issues, wacky, zany characters that just don't fit the tone that the world had in previous games, weird story beats, useless characters existing for cheap gags, completely unnecessary plotlines, and cartoonishly evil villains. Now, I did just list a lot of different things, so let's go piece by piece and figure out exactly where things started going wrong for this game. During the development of the game, the devs said that they wanted to go for a deeply personal story for both Blazkowicz and the player, with the setting feeling like a twisted and deformed Nazi-conformative nation. And they did make it a personal one, but it was a one-way feeling specifically. Given the fact that it would be fair to assume that a lot of people would be playing in America, and most people would hate Nazis, it would also be fair to assume that there would be a lot that could be done with the story and characters. It would also be fair to assume that given its appearance on my list, it didn't do very well. First off, the game tackles Blazko's struggle to grow in an abusive household with a racist, physically and verbally abusive father with very questionable morals, which is great. I'm glad that we got that. I just wish it would be important to the story at all. But, you know, I want a holiday in Spain and fair working conditions for developers, so I guess we just don't get what we want, do we? When the devs said a deeply personal story for both the player and Blazkowicz, I was hoping that they would find a way to turn this into a personal story in the sense that we would see true anguish in the people we meet. torn by the horrors that they've seen, despair that Blazko has never felt, seeing everything he knew and loved about his country gone, the indomitable American spirit fighting to get free from the cage the Nazi war machine forced them into. What are you, fucking stupid? You had faith the studio could deliver on their promises? What the fuck is wrong with you? Of course they didn't deliver on that. What we got was a boring story with truly heart-wrenching moments, completely ruined and bastardized to tell a more loose, fearless, grandiose, and crazy story. Well, they sure delivered on that. They completely ruined what the first two games built up in a large series of short drops and sudden stops. Throughout the game, BJ talks to himself about how he's hoping Caroline is shining down upon him, hoping she'll grant him her wings, just so he can secure a large enough victory to die content. Blazko knows his body is dying and that it won't stand up to much more battery. He worries desperately about how the Resistance will function without him, how Anya would take his death, and how she could ever raise twins in this horribly fucked up world. Until the moment after a mission where Anya tries to connect with him again. Anya can see the man she loves in front of her, the savior of the Resistance, the trump card against the Nazis, and that this man is avoiding her. Deep down, she knows something is off, but she doesn't see what Blazko knows about himself. That he's a dying man in a broken and battered body, near the end of his line, staring into the abyss while the abyss stares back at him. And he's trying desperately to find the words to tell her to stop her from worrying, showing her that he will be okay, that the Resistance will win, and that they one day will have their dream. But he can't find the words. He instead confides in his fears and tells her outright that he knows he's a walking corpse, and that she shouldn't keep pretending he's not. Now, what is wrong with this scene? The fact that William is refusing to acknowledge the Resistance or even Anya's feelings on the matter, pushing her and everyone else away as well? Or the fact that Super Spesh cheers for joy finally being able to take a shit in a toilet with running water after intruding a seemingly important story arc between these two characters. What fucking planet am I on? How, in what fucking way is this okay? I just cannot understand at all where the writers were coming from here. It's one thing to break up sad and sappy moments with some humor to stop it from getting too sad, but this is the equivalent to having one of your kneecaps blasted off, that person who blasted them off saying, well, at least you've still got the other one, laughing, and then that same person blasting off the other one as well. I cannot fathom what decisions needed to be made to get to that moment. Did the writers seriously feel that they needed to jump the shark this early? There was plenty that could have been done with this story. They didn't need to resort to bastardizing these characters' arcs or feelings in a pretty genuinely horrible fashion. But they did. Much like the source code to this game, I want the notes and the transcripts the writers had for this godforsaken story, so I can see where the snowballing effect began, because like I said earlier, this is just one of the many things wrong with this story in this game. I honestly think that might be the perfect example of just what is wrong with this game from both a tone and story beat angle, because as you've probably guessed, this has no reason to exist. It looks and sounds like it's foreshadowing events for later, but it just fucking isn't going anywhere. You could replace William's fear for death with a need to breed with a Vaporeon, or a desire to have his balls kicked.
You something if you don't think it's weird? I guess. I like having my balls kicked. Did you see my message? No, I didn't. I like having my balls kicked. I didn't get your message. I like being kicked in the balls.
And it would literally have the same effect given what comes immediately after voicing these concerns to anyone. You want to know what is foreshadowed and manages to go somewhere though? Anya's pregnant rage. For some reason, Blazko's fear of death goes nowhere, and gets dropped the second he gets a new body, but Anya's pregnant rage is hinted throughout the story a couple times and manifests as the worst scene in the entirety of New Colossus.
Just had a big fight with the Nazis. Barely made it. William? Don't know if this is normal, but I think the pregnancy is making me a little, you know, excited. Oh God, is everyone listening in on this frequency?
Yes.
Yes. Back sauce.
Speaking of story beats that don't go anywhere and are generally weird, Sigrun, just as a character, has no reason to exist at all, and I believe she perfectly exemplifies what is wrong with a lot of this game. Her character is a fat Nazi who is the daughter of Frau Engel, the secondary antagonist in the first game, and the completely ruined primary antagonist in the second. Sigrun spends the entire duration of the second game getting called a fat Nazi, which is what she is, or in terms of being a Nazi, was. Her sole existence is as a punching bag. People rag on her all of the time, no one trusts her at all, and no one really cares about her. Right up until the end of the game, where she calls out Grace for being xenophobic and almost killing her in the process, where they all seemingly change their tune and seem to really love Sigrun, which makes no fucking sense at all, to be completely honest. And the only plot contribution that she has was decrypting the Odin codes for the final mission. We're never given a reason for why she's the only one that can handle this. If I had to guess, it would be because she understands the Nazi code system, but it could also just be because she's German, and the codes are in German. But at the same time, it could also just be a plot device to make her slightly useful to the plot. We'll never really know, but I'm putting all my eggs in that last basket. I understand that her arc, if you can even call it that, is to bully her into standing up for herself, proving that she is a Nazi no longer. But she's just such a weak character. It's almost like the writers dug themselves a hole when they killed a perfectly good, well-liked, entertaining Nazi-turned-resistance member Klaus in the first game. It's almost like the decisions the writers keep making keep snowballing into bigger and bigger missteps, creating a perfect storm of flying shit. Speaking of flying shit, Frau Engel has been completely ruined as a villain in this game. She is cartoonishly evil. She turns from this highly calculating woman with a fierce combination and a threatening aura and a wild personality to a complete megalomaniac, more obsessed with romanticizing BJ as a Jewish Aryan, fetishizing him in every face-to-face meet they have, not to mention her compulsive laugh while she performs war atrocities. I think it's saying quite a lot that she is the most brutal single character in the game. Which is saying something, because that said game includes Hitler himself. Not even Hitler is as brutal as she is in this game. She is downright dislikable, which I guess is the point, but at least have her be intimidating. She's not intimidating in the slightest, she's just mental. When we were on the train with her in the first game, there was something truly disturbing about her. She immediately showed how threatening she could be. It sent chills down my spine hearing that piercing ring when the gun got pulled on Blazko, and everyone suddenly perked up thinking shit was about to go down. You want to know what the most disturbing scene Frau Engel has in The New Colossus is? When she chops Caroline's head at the start of the game, she cannot stop laughing. The same with every other Nazi in the room. She then picks up Caroline's head, forces it into Blazko's face, making him kiss it, then forces it into both Sigrun's face and her crotch. In what way is this intimidating? How is this not just cartoonish given what has come previously? This is the same with every other scene she's in. She's never intimidating, she's just batshit crazy. The worst is when Blazko is captured. She takes the ring he went back to his home to get, puts it on, and laughs hysterically. The game is riddled with scenes like this, and it completely undermines any threat the Nazis are supposed to portray. The only scene I can think that's only slightly intimidating is when Spesh comes to rescue Blazko, gets murdered, and Engel threatens to kill all of Blazko's friends who are waiting in the garage with the getaway vehicle. Now I can't speak for everyone, but I can speak for myself, and when I played this scene for the first time, I wasn't intimidated much at all, because these scenes passed so easily There was no build-up. There was no tension. We all knew this wasn't going to be the end of Blazkowicz. And lo and behold, he's not dead. He's got a brand new body, a better body, and that comes with the abandonment of all of his fears. He gets a new lease on life. In all honesty, I truly believe that even with all the bonkers shit that this game has, this is truly the moment where the game forgot what it was about and strictly became about fighting. Because that's what Americans do. They fight. They don't struggle, they don't hurt, they party and they fight. This is truly the moment when the developers stopped caring, because after this, we don't get anything close to brilliance again. You know what? I'm feeling like a rapid fire round is necessary because this is taking far too long to get through. So here is everything wrong with the tone and story in The New Colossus that I haven't mentioned so far. Super Spesh, as a character, being an AWOL schizo who is a major conspiracy theorist, has no need to exist at all in Wolf 2. And even though he's certainly part of the American population, I refuse to believe that a man like this would have been able to survive as long as he has. Sigrun and Bumbate just having sex and deciding to do so in a vehicle used for missions and people shrugging it off. It's different when Anya and William did it in the first game because they were a couple and it made sense with the story and arc between them. The party scene for Blazko's 50th. Although it's funny and it makes sense to celebrate the way that they are with all these new members, it would not exist had the writers actually done what they set out to do in the planning phase and things didn't snowball out of control. Hitler just pissing in a pot, rambling about Jews and how horrible they are, throwing up, crying on the director of the movie he's producing's shoulder about how he's dying, and then murdering a man for being from Arizona, which is, you know, fair enough, honestly. The entire execution scene and getting Blazko his new body. Set even says that they've only got 7 seconds to get him oxygen or else his head will die. I understand that this is a story with a lot of elements that aren't supposed to be taken as seriously, but lo and behold, the scene is multiple times longer than that 7-second window. And finally, Wyatt's entire acid trip story while being on a deadly operation in the New Orleans ghetto. This list basically sums up my entire beef with this game. It knows what the previous games were, but it has no idea what it wants it to be. It teeters on the edge of being a truly depressing game so often, but it immediately cuts to being a Marvel comedy seconds later. This game has a massive identity crisis, and it's just a shame that its great moments like Blazko's foreshadowed fear of death, Wyatt's existential dread and depression from learning of the realities of the universe while tripping balls on acid, the great rallying speech at the end of the game to get the people of the world to stand up and take action against the Nazis, Blazko's childhood flashbacks to his abusive father and loving mother, showing how dysfunctional his family was, or even the courtroom scene telling his mother in a hallucination that he's got kids on the way, and him wishing that there was something he could have done to save her, have been undermined so horribly by the rapid de-escalation of tension that the game builds up. Overall, as much as I want to love this game, there's just so much wrong with it that I cannot ignore. I can't be ignorant to it because of what has come previously. But I've said my piece. I'm done talking about these games. I'm gonna go play Doom instead. At least with that, I know I won't be disappointed. Okay, so that was the Wolfenstein New Colossus video. This is all unscripted, by the way, just off the cuff. Just wanted to say thank you for all the views on the previous video. It means a lot. Definitely didn't expect to get 100 views. I had a lot of fun working on it. I hope you had a lot of fun watching it. Same with this one, actually. I've taken a lot of breaks with this one. I've had a lot to do. Uni exams and assignments being what they are. Yeah. More videos coming. I'm going to take a break from backlog stuff for a bit. I think Doom might be my next video from the backlog. My next one will probably be about Darkwood and Outlast and how Outlast is just a completely shit game. No one should ever play it, and everyone should play Darkwood instead. So, look forward to that one. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.